Es war einmal eine schöne Prinzessin, die lange, prächtige Haare hatte. Sie wohnte in einem großen Turm, der weder Treppe noch Türen hatte. Eines Tages kam ein Prinz zum Turm und schrie: »Hey, warum sehen die Verben in diesem Märchen so komisch aus?« Und Rapunzel schrie zurück: »Darüber spricht Herr Antrim in diesem Video.« Hallo Deutschlerner! In our previous grammar lesson, we talked about when to use the Präteritum tense and how to form it with regular verbs. Today we're diving into the mysterious world of irregular verbs in the Präteritum tense. This lesson is pretty long and detailed, so there are timestamps in the description to help you navigate to the parts of the lesson that you need the most. There is also a link in the description to a video that simply has the example story from the end of the lesson. Future videos will tackle more complexities such as modal verbs in this tense and a deep dive into haben and sein. So if you're looking for more lessons about this tense, please check out the link in the description. As a quick reminder, both the perfect and Präteritum tenses talk about past events, but while the perfect tense says this is done, the Präteritum tense claims this was happening. Although in reality, Germans often opt for the perfect in conversation and Präteritum in either writing or storytelling. The basics of irregular verbs in the Präteritum tense are similar to the basics of regular verbs. Ich and RCS forms of verbs don't get endings at all, and the other forms simply take the same endings that they did in the present tense. The downside here is that the stem for each verb is weird, we'll say. There are some patterns which we can talk about here in a little bit, but for the most part, you simply have to memorize each irregular verb as you come across it with this tense. Let's start with a very common verb, gehen. The stem of this verb in the Präteritum tense is ging. You can use it in the following example sentences. Ich ging die Straße entlang. I went along the street. Du gingst damals gerne in die Stadt. You liked going into the city back then. Der Prinz ging ein bisschen weiter. The prince went a bit farther. 1958 gingen wir ins Kino, um Angriff der 20-Meter-Frau zu sehen. In 1958, we went to the movie theater in order to see Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. Ihr gingt gemeinsam zum Konzert. You went to the concert together. Meine Freunde gingen zur Party. My friends went to the party. As you can see from this, we have the base form ging, and then we just add endings to it. Ich and RCS don't get endings. Du requires an ST, wir en, ihr t, and the other two z's get en. Let's try it with the verb helfen. The stem of this one becomes half. Ich half, du halfst, sie, es half, wir halfen, ihr halft, sie halfen. Now it's your turn. How would you conjugate the verb geben? I'll give you a hint. The base form is gab in this tense. Pause the video and try it out for yourself before continuing. And the correct conjugation is ich gab, du gabst, sie, es gab, wir gaben, ihr gabt, sie gaben. If the German verb's Präteritum base form has an S or an S set at the end of it, it needs an E between the base form and the endings for du and ihr. You can see this in the verb lesen, which becomes las in the Präteritum tense. Here's the full conjugation. Ich las, du lasest, sie, es las, wir lasen, ihr laset, sie lasen. My students' favorite verb in this tense is usually the verb essen. The Präteritum version is aß. The conjugation of it is ich aß, du aßest, sie, es aß, wir aßen, ihr aßet, sie aßen. Now you try it out with the verb sitzen. The base form of this verb is saß. Pause the video and try it out for yourself before continuing. The correct conjugation of sitzen in the Präteritum tense is ich saß, du saßest, sie, es saß, wir saßen, ihr saßet, sie saßen. Similar to what happens in the Präsens tense, D and T require an extra E as well. Take the verb finden as an example. The base form is fand. Ich fand. Du fandest. Sie, es fand. Wir fanden. Ihr fandet. Sie fanden. Another example of this would be the verb tun, which becomes tat in the Präteritum tense. Ich tat. Du tatest. Sie, es tat. Wir taten. Ihr tatet. Sie taten. Now try it out with the verb verstehen, which becomes verstand in the Präteritum tense. Pause the video and try it out for yourself before continuing. And the correct conjugation of verstehen in the Präteritum tense is Ich verstand. Du verstandest. Sie, es verstand. Wir verstanden. Ihr verstandet. Sie verstanden. There is a category of verbs in the Präteritum tense that some teachers call weak irregular verbs. They do this because there is a stem change, but the verb still ends with te, which makes it look like and act like a regular verb. I don't use this explanation, but I wanted you to be aware that it exists in case you read someone else's explanation online and you're wondering what's going on. An example of this is the verb bringen, which becomes brachte in the Präteritum. This makes the full conjugation Ich brachte, du brachtest, sie, es brachte, wir brachten, ihr brachtet, sie brachten. As you can see, if you start by knowing that bringen becomes brachte in the Präteritum tense, you don't need to classify them as a new category of verb, as the endings, st for du, en for wir and the two z's, and a t for the ear form, are all the same as they would have been for any other irregular verb. In fact, those are the same endings that we use for regular verbs too, if you just think of the base form of a regular verb as whatever the usual stem is, plus te. My complaint with the idea of weak irregular verbs is that it complicates things more than is needed. If a verb is regular, lose the en at the end and add te followed by the conjugated ending. If a verb is irregular, memorize the base form and add a conjugated ending if needed. Making students learn that some verbs have a stem change and a te at the end of it is just an unnecessary memorization. To prove to me that you think it's super easy to conjugate verbs like this, try to conjugate the verb denken, which becomes dachte in this tense. Don't forget to pause the video and try it out for yourself before continuing. And the correct conjugation should be Ich dachte. Du dachtest. Sie, es dachte. Wir dachten. Ihr dachtet. Sie dachten. Now, I know what you're thinking because I get the same reaction from my students every single year whenever I teach this. How in the world do we decide what the change should be from the infinitive into the Präteritum tense? How do we know that it's bringen changes to brachte instead of bringen changing to brung or something? There isn't actually a good answer to this. Honestly, you're probably just going to have to memorize them. The good news is that there are patterns that things follow, so you may be able to help yourself out while you're trying to memorize it. When you take a step back and view the verb in three main parts, the infinitive, Präteritum, and perfect, you can see these patterns. For example, some verbs change from ei in the infinitive to ie in the Präteritum and perfect forms. For example, bleiben, blieb, geblieben. Schreiben, schrieb, geschrieben. Schreien, schrie, geschrien. Some verbs have an e in the infinitive and an a in the Präteritum and an o in the perfect. For example, brechen, brach, gebrochen. Helfen, half, geholfen. Nehmen, nahm, genommen. Sprechen, sprach, gesprochen. Sterben, starb, gestorben. You may have noticed another trend with these verbs, and that is that they all have a stem change in the Präsens as well, namely an e changing to an I. Brechen becomes brich. Helfen, hilft. Nehmen, nimmt. Sprechen, spricht. Sterben, stirbt. There are quite a few other patterns that verbs follow in these tenses, so instead of just giving you a list of them in this video, I'm actually going to direct you to one of my older videos that is linked in the description. This one shows you the patterns of irregular verbs in both of the past tenses in German. My most recent video about this is from 2021, but it is so perfectly crafted that recreating it would be a disservice to the original video. Obviously, the video for today so far is lacking in examples, so let's try out a story that mixes irregular and regular verbs in the Präteritum tense. In einem kleinen Dorf lebten freundliche Menschen. Eines Tages entschieden sich einige von ihnen für ein Abenteuer. Ein junger Mann namens Timo führte die Gruppe. Gemeinsam gingen sie den ganzen Tag durch den Wald. Timo erzählte Geschichten und die anderen hörten zu. Am Nachmittag trafen sie nette Leute aus einem anderen Dorf. Sie lachten, sangen und machten sogar ein Lagerfeuer. In der Nacht hörten sie Tiere im Wald, aber das störte sie nicht. Sie fühlten sich sicher und genossen die Zeit. Nach der Reise kehrten sie ins Dorf zurück. Timo erzählte die Geschichte und alle lauschten gespannt. Das Dorf hatte eine aufregende Zeit erlebt und die Erinnerungen wurden zu spannenden Geschichten, die man sich noch lange erzählte. Now it's your turn. Try writing your own story in the comments down below. I'll read your stories and give you feedback about your grammar and the story as a whole. If you're eager to polish the skills that you learned from this video, consider joining my Deutschlerner Club. It will take you through the A1 and A2 levels of German and will have you speaking with natives in no time. If you're ready for the next adventure, click over here for the deep dive into the other lessons in this series about the Präteritum tense. Das ist alles für heute. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss!